Danny, I've heard you on the phone recently discussing with buyers the pros and cons of ground floor flats.
Yeah.
What's your professional opinion? What are the pros of buying a ground floor flat?
Sure, that's a great question. I know you're always listening into my telephone conversation.
I am.
But it's good because you give me good feedback, so I appreciate it. So, great question. In terms of ground floor flats, so we have a number of ground floor flats, and I know there's always some concerns when people call in and ask about the ground floor flats, and sometimes they have a preference of a higher floor.
Okay.
So ground floor flats, in terms of pros, so the great thing with ground floor flats, especially when they're period conversion and everything else, most of you have the garden, and the ground floor flat is the one that has either the private access to that garden, so that's always great. So anyone who has a garden, that would be great. That's number one. Number two, a good advantage of having a ground floor flat, of course, if you have family or if you have a young child, the pushchair, it could be a real pain to be able to have to take that pushchair upstairs. Obviously, if you've got no lift, and if it's a period conversion, in most cases, because of fire and safety reasons, you can't leave that pushchair downstairs.
Okay.
So to have to take your baby upstairs, come back down to the pushchair, obviously that's not ideal. And obviously, another thing is elderly people. We have a lot of people who are downsizing, and of course, the ground floor flat is a great option.
Great.
So those are one of the things that are very the advantage, absolutely.
Okay, and what about the cons?
So the cons, it's interesting. So one thing that's very common and we get a lot is it's more open to burglaries.
Okay.
So it's more probable that the ground floor flat is going to be burgled. Now, I come from a residential lettings background, and in my years of experience, I know that that's not the case, because we've had properties in which they've been burgled, the first floor, the second floor, and the ground floor hasn't been.
Okay.
So yeah, you could take that.
It's not just a given that,
It's not a given, absolutely. Another thing is that in terms of the cons of the ground floor flat is that if you have someone upstairs, which you very likely will do if you're on the ground floor, is if you have a noisy neighbour, then that's something that you're going to have to put up with.
Yeah.
One thing that's great is that in the most recent years, the laws of period conversions for soundproof, they've increased that, so it's much more strict.
Okay.
So if there's been a period conversion that's been recent, you may not have that issue. But if it's a period conversion that was done many years ago, then you may have a lot of noise coming from upstairs.
It's something to consider.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great, thank you. Any final thoughts on ground floor flats?
I guess not. I mean, I guess the other thing, if I had to point one more thing, would be damp.
Okay.
You may get, you're maybe more open to getting damp on a ground floor flat than you would be on the first floor and second floor.
Okay.
And I guess on a very last note would be the fact that natural light, you may get more natural light on the first floor and second floor,
yes,
or above, than being on that ground floor as well.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for sharing.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. Till the next one.
Yeah, exactly. Take care.